private equity is not exactly private equity anymore. And I think maybe the world needs more of that in terms of aversion to risk.
Welcome to VIA News CEO and Founder Interviews. Today we have the pleasure to be here with Pedro Pinto Ferreira, the CEO and founder of Grupo Domínio Captial. Pedro, how are you?
Very good. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here.
Welcome. So before going into your company there, I want to know a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, I had a curious shift of gears. I started as a lawyer. That was my basic graduation. I graduated in the Catholic University of Lisbon, then went to practice law in London for a period of close to 2 years. I saw that law had great things, but also great gaps in terms of what I thought my potential could be. So I shifted gears to finance, went to do a postgrad in the US, Harvard Business School, and started out right after working for a PE firm, private equity firm, on their first South American fund in São Paulo. So after a very settled life in São Paulo, which was, of course, this was 10 years ago, São Paulo was rocketing high, I had the opportunity, which at the time could be a challenge or an opportunity, depends how you see it, of taking the lead of a group that my father founded, and our family founded 35 years ago, and that needed a different shape, so to speak. So this is when I moved back to Portugal after 2 years abroad, close to 3 years abroad, and arrived in Lisbon in the middle of the crisis in 2009.
Oh.
That was really not easy, but it was a big challenge. So I did see all of the progress and all the changes that the country went through for the past 10 years, and which of course changes that impacted our business and myself as a professional.
I want to go into that, but before, tell us a little bit about how would you define Grupo Domínio Captial today?
Grupo Domínio Captial, as I was telling you, it went through a big change, like a lot of family groups, especially here in Portugal, which is a small economy. This group is focused on one person, so it was kind of a one-man show. With two areas of focus, real estate and infrastructure and oil and gas. These two areas were spread between Portugal and Angola, which were the two primarily markets for the group. And then of course there was the need to diversify a lot of things, not only markets, clients, vision, but also mentalities, because of course the groups need to evolve and need to adapt to a different world. And I think today the Grupo Domínio Captial, which I have the pleasure of presiding, has positioned itself as a business and investment boutique that does Portuguese-speaking markets as a core geographic focus. That has the two sectors, so real estate and infrastructure and oil and gas, that were on the founding of the group, together with financial markets, which was a sector that we added over the past 10 years, spread across the different markets where we have operations, so headquartered in Lisbon, with an office in Luanda, an office in Maputo, and an office in London, and with the basic purpose of serving the international world in the local markets that we know well, via being advisors or via being direct investors. So this is today our positioning, and I think it will continue to be if we do our job well.
We're more than 10 years into an upcycle since the last financial crisis in 08. There's some signs of recession coming in, but there's no sign of it so far. How do you see the business that you're involved with and the companies that you're involved with, how do you see them preparing for a future recession?
Well, listen, Miguel, I think we will touch on that point later about entrepreneurship and about being able to adapt. On my course of business as CEO of Domínio Captial, there were a lot of things changing over the past 10 years. When I grew up in this career particularly, we were familiar with names that don't even exist anymore. So names such as Lehman Brothers, such as Espírito Santo, such as many others, were names that were by far the big pillars of some of the work that we do. And today, these names cease to exist. So I think recession or non-recession, institutions have to prepare themselves to adapt to a world that is by far the most challenging world I think we've ever seen, in terms of speed, in terms of pace. I think recession is definitely something that probably will come. I'm not certain that it will be as short as people think. And the reason for that is that, unlike other crises, the crisis that we encountered in 2008, 2009 was by far the one that had the most impact on the worldwide economy. You've never seen in previous crises countries contracting so much in GDP as they were in 2008, 2009. So these 10 years were definitely the recovery of that. But the recovery of that in a probably very smooth way. You don't see the level of excitement over the past 10 years that you saw previous to this. So I think the economy still has space to grow, especially if the governments invest on the economy as they should. And I think us as companies, the way we have positioned ourselves, and this is what I see from personal experience and what I try to impact on my company as well, is a very conservative approach on excitement. I think all of the big push on investment, counting that great days are ahead, was never the case because the crisis of 2008 impacted very much on people's lives, from households to companies. So I think companies are prudent, companies are conservative. You see by the level of money that some of these companies have on their treasuries. And I think people are today more controlled towards a crisis than they were 10 years ago.
But we're in a paradigm where money is really cheap, that we are seeing huge valuations everywhere across the board and across the globe. So how do you see, do you think we're in a bubble right now?
I think it depends on the sector. I don't believe so. I think from what I see, the economies are growing at a normal pace. I think it is true that some of these sectors, especially technology, I would say, have a big valuations. You see on the level of IPOs, and then the correction in the market, which happens to companies from Facebook to Farfetch. It's all across. And I think that's a normal way of the market telling these companies, wait a minute, take it slow. That is happening, and I think investors are today very well aware of that. On particular sectors such as real estate, for instance, which a lot of people talk about, there could be some overpricing, but I don't think this is a bubble. I think the bubble we've seen in 2008, 2009, that's a bubble. That's really something big and scary. I don't think that is the case right now.
Grupo Domínio Captial is in several places in Africa, so Angola, Mozambique, and in Brazil, the other side of the Atlantic. So how do you see this? There seems to be this chronic dispute between the United States and China, this trade war lingering. Do you see it being detrimental to your business there?
We, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because I think that's a great business to be in, we unfortunately don't have a lot of exposure ourselves in terms of investors to exporting industries, with the exception of oil, which of course is an exporting industry in Angola. So on that particular sense of oil, yes, definitely, oil is being affected, but it's not only because of the trade war, it's being affected for the past years in terms of offer demand. I think for the exporting industries, especially in these countries, the trade war has a lot of impact. Of course, China is a big consumer, and both of commodities as well as products in general. So if trade war encounters more and more obstacles, and if it prolongs itself in time, I think it's bad for the entire world, not only bad for Africa. Africa is today still a little bit isolated from this. It's a mostly combined of emerging markets, and therefore emerging markets, Brazil is a good example of that. Emerging markets need a lot, whatever their product is for export. The consumer of that end product is crucial to be active and to be consuming. China is therefore one good example of that. But I think it impacts more on the Angola and Mozambique front. It impacts more on the commodity side than the pure economy as it is. And I think therefore that the trade war could be something relevant if it continues to go on, which I don't think it will be the case. I think 2020 is definitely a year which I anticipate, especially because of elections in the US, to be a calmer year than 2019 in that sense, in the trade war sense. But Angola and Mozambique have challenging days ahead, especially Angola on the fact that, of course, it concentrates itself on exporting oil mainly. So diversification of the economy is a crucial aspect. And on the Mozambique front, Mozambique has been with high hopes on exporting gas and exporting oil in the future, big foreign direct investment coming into the country. And seizing that moment is crucial for the future of the country on the days ahead.
We have all these countries tied to the Portuguese language. How do you see the role of Portugal here when we have Brazil that has been growing steadily for a while, then it's not going so well right now. How do you see these economies going, Angola, Mozambique, Brazil, in relation to Portugal? What can we do there?
Sure. I think Portugal has been doing a lot. I think definitely Portugal is one of, if you look at the charts and the statistics, Portugal is one of the top countries with whom Angola, Mozambique and Brazil do business with, both in terms of being a buyer or a seller of products or services. I think Portugal has played on its dimension, which is limited, a very important role. And I think it will continue to play. As the years progress, I think these countries see that Portugal is much more than a business partner. I think Portugal, due to the history, some people may say it's good or bad, but Portugal today, on the eyes of Angola, Mozambique, I'm not sure so much about Brazil, but Angola and Mozambique, which I know better, I've lived in both. I think they see Portugal today as more than just a business partner, as somebody that cares about the country because it needs it, because it likes its people, because the culture is the same, because of many reasons. So the role that Portugal has to play, and I think we try to do the same, it's not considering that we have a net value just because we're Portuguese. That's not enough anymore. But if you add up your expertise in a specific area with the fact that you're Portuguese and the fact that there's a lot of similarities on culture and many other things, that creates an edge. That creates an edge for us as Portuguese, and that creates an edge for Angola and Mozambique, which of course can count on a more developed economy to learn in expertise, to learn in development, to learn in governance, to learn in so many other things. So our role is definitely present. I think Portugal did a great job on seizing that for the past years, but also did a great job over the past 10 years on growing more internally. So not only depending on these countries, as we were doing so a few years back, but developing internally core industries of Portugal, which have been good for years and years, like the textile industry or the shoe business or the mold industry, which today make Portugal an exporter of this to the entire world, not just these two countries, but conserving our particular interests on African countries where there's a lot to be done. So Portugal can definitely play a role on the coming 100 years to come at least.
Where do you see the private equity investing industry evolving over the years?
Private equity is relatively small in Portugal. It's mainly, as far as I see it, concentrated on restructuring of assets or on the real estate side, which of course has been through a huge NPL crisis, so to speak. So, and you see the same in Angola and Mozambique. The exposure of private equity firms to country Angola and country Mozambique is not even 5% in the entire continent, so it's relatively small. The reason for that is that private equity needs structure, needs companies with history, with track record, with audited accounts, with a more structured economy. When you don't see yourself with that kind of profile, it's very hard for private equity to take that risk, not for venture capital, but for private equity. In Portugal, I think most of the private equity in the future will be focused on the technology side, I believe, as well as some key aspects depending on the trends that the economy is going, being it real estate or being it the industry. As you probably have been following, the mold industry in Portugal has faced a lot of acquisitions over the past years because it's a very good industry, but that has a range of time, then it ceases to exist and another sector comes. So I think it's something that will grow. I just don't think it's something that will grow at a huge pace because there's just no power in the economy to absorb a lot of investment. I have a vision that probably is not the political correct one, that private equity is not exactly private equity anymore. And I think maybe the world needs more of that in terms of aversion to risk. What I mean with this is that private equity funds, especially the big ones, their share of private equity is only 5% of what they do. All the rest is leveraged on their investors or leveraged on the banks or leveraged on other co-investing funds. And I think in that sense we have a risky, but we have a different approach, because when we do private equity, it's actually our private equity that is being directly exposed to the businesses that we have operation in. And of course, when it's your own cash, you do things in a different way. And as a company, I think that's one of the add values that we've brought to the market, is having skin in the game, having our own funds exposed not leveraged, exposed directly into the opportunities that we see ourselves and believe in. And I think that's a different way of seeing private equity, unlike putting it all in a bucket, where there's basically all of the big funds and all of the small firms, all of it together. It's different. Private equity has evolved very much so, and you have to really see things in a different way. What is the big private equity, which is very small of private equity, and where are small funds or small companies that have direct exposure to the opportunities that they invest, because that's a partner that you want, a partner that is really exposing your skin to the game.
What are for you the most relevant asset classes today?
Well, we as a group focus ourselves on sourcing deals that we are a part of. So we are not your typical financial investor. The kind of investments we ended up doing and exposing our direct capital to are businesses that we see growing, that we help create ourselves. So we are not your typical financial investor that looks at asset classes and then invests. I can definitely think that there's a couple of areas, if I answer that way, hope it helps. There's a couple of areas that I think are unavoidable in the future. Mobility is one of them. I think mobility within cities is something that we see a lot of change in already, but it will continue to change. I think energy is definitely something which I see is attached to the first one. If you take the example of electric cars, for instance, if you and me and our entire families and friends and all of them suddenly buy electric cars, the grid in Lisbon or in any other city would not be able to support the charging of these cars at the end of the day. So of course, the energy side goes very well with the mobility side. Then I think it's also unavoidable to say, and this is my vision, that we have a lot to change in the way we live. I think within cities especially, the way we see hotels growing and hostels growing and all of that, that's just the beginning. I think the way we live within cities, the smart city concept, and the way we move into a town that has concepts where you live in, where you move in and everything is set and ready and go, that is something that is going on a lot in the US, and I think that will come to Europe sooner or later due to overpopulation, but also due to the growth of technology. Then at the end of the day, it's up for the adjustment of how the economy sees itself adapting to all of this. Portugal has a lot of room to grow, but I think mainly on asset classes that relate to the industries that we have developed over time, such as tourism, such as hospitality. These industries, which are the core of tourism in Portugal, huge participation in the GDP. If you combine that with technology, I think that has a great impact on how we can see the asset classes which could be important for Portugal moving forward. All the rest relates to bonds or relates to sovereigns or relating to shares. Probably not the most capable one to respond. It depends a lot on how the world moves next year, which is going to be a very important year.
What's your take on companies focusing on quarterly performance instead of a more long-term kind of view to the company? What's your take on that?
I think it's a necessity these days. The way companies are seeing themselves and the way, not only companies, the way investors see companies. Investors don't trust on the big names anymore, just because they're big names. I think the reason, one of the big changes that technology and the speed of things, if you look at the past of history, you see the agricultural revolution, you see the industrial revolution, these took hundreds of years to implement themselves. On the technology revolution, if we want to call it that way, it's changing every day. So if you as a company don't prove to your investors that you're going on the right direction, you just don't have the trust of those investors anymore. So I'm not sure if it's a good or a bad thing, but it's definitely something that it's needed because that's what the investors are looking for.
I want to switch gears a little bit and go into entrepreneurship. In terms of the VC industry, comparing Lisbon to Brazil to Angola and Mozambique, what's your take on that?
Well, I think entrepreneurship, in my view, is it's a concept that people have a different view of. Let's put it this way. When you think about an entrepreneur, you suddenly, or usually, you picture this guy alone in a garage trying to invent an app or trying to do a startup. It's not only that. I think every day, and I compare this to my industry, which is not technology, every day, each one of us, myself included, have to be entrepreneurs. Otherwise we die. I don't think entrepreneurship today is an accomplishment. I think it's a necessity. I think it's mandatory for each one of us to be entrepreneurs. Otherwise, there might not be a next day. So I have to reinvent my company every day, being it in Brazil, Angola, or Portugal. I have to see where the opportunities lie, adapt to the competition, see how technology is impacting on what I do, see if I don't have that edge on technology, how can I compensate with other things? And I think the CEO of IKEA or H&M or whatever the case may be, as much as Facebook or Spotify or any of those brands, everyone today needs to be an entrepreneur. The big names and settling yourself in a chair because you're the CEO of BMW, it's not enough. Even on the car industry, which was stable for many years, with the electric cars and Tesla and everything that is changing, they needed to move completely away from their core way of doing business to something completely different. Otherwise, they would just perish. So I think entrepreneurship today is around the corner, is a necessity, and I think as Portuguese have adapted well to that. And I think, to me, I have to be an entrepreneur every day. Otherwise, we won't be talking here next year or in 2 years from now, regardless of how stable your company is.
How do you see the paradigm here between people building a company through sales or through VC money? What do you see there? What kind of differences do you see there? Do you think both ways can work?
I think both ways can work. Again, I'm not a VC guy, so I'm not sure exactly what's the use of proceed of most of this cash that you raise. So that's definitely one of the core things as you raise cash on a VC process, be it Series A, B, or C. The use of proceed to this is crucial. I struggle to understand, to be very honest, how companies that can raise billions of dollars, being it on VC funds or IPOs, continue to deliver huge numbers on losses every year, and the investors continue to support it. I think it's a risky move, but maybe because I don't understand it very well. But to me, I'm a revenues guy. I think that companies should be driven by revenue. This is what gets you going. This is what your investors see at the end of the day. And this is what you as a CEO need to deliver. This is my view. But again, I'm not a VC guy.
Pedro, please share with us a good piece of advice with young entrepreneurs.
Young entrepreneurs, I think you're doing very well. I think we're all doing very well in a lot of things. I think we should keep on doing very well. And we should definitely see that being an entrepreneur today is mandatory. And I think at the end of the day, when you wake up in the morning and you go and shave and put a shirt or a suit, you want to know that you're doing the right thing. And I think being an entrepreneur today is the right thing. Otherwise, as I told you before, we are not going to survive any longer. I think we, as Portuguese, have a good way of reinventing ourselves. I think we did that combined with the core of what we were as a country back from years and years. And for entrepreneurs today, and I consider myself one, so I can say for that, I think the future is ours. And if we don't change a lot of things, and I'm not even going to the environmental side of things, but if we don't change a lot of processes, a lot of how we do things, and try to do it better, there's just not going to be a space for us. It's a game for big economies, for big companies, for big worlds. And if we don't reach to that level, it's going to be hard for us to mean something.
Pedro, glad to have you here. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.